Welcome, everyone, to another monthly Eckerson Group webinar. We're really glad you're with us here today. Topic for today is product evaluation and selection do's and don'ts. And we think this is going to be a really good one because in our practice, we often help clients evaluate products and select them. And today we have two of our consultants who've recently been engaged on projects just like that. Senior consultant Jay Pictionary is one of our data architects, and Sean Hewitt, another senior consultant who focuses on data governance. So welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, Wayne.
Thanks, Wayne.
And a little bit about us. We are a boutique consulting firm that helps commercial and nonprofit organizations get more value from their data. We specialize in delivering actionable data strategies, roadmaps, and governance plans. And although we do implementation work, that's not our focus. We are more on the strategy side. So we've been very happy to have lots of clients, as you can see here, over the years. There's some great companion content to this. One, we built out a topic page with about 18 related resources, from podcasts to webinars to articles and reports. And also, we think last month's webinar, which was about change management, is particularly relevant to this topic today, because whatever you purchase, you probably want to make sure that users are going to use it, right? So how do you manage change? Whenever you introduce new technologies, you're forcing people and teams to change how they do what they do. And that's never easy. So we do recommend that you take a look at that webcast. So let's go to the next slide. This is our agenda. I'm going to give you a little background. We're going to address some of the major questions and pitfalls that occur in these types of projects. And then we're going to go step by step through our methodology and some of the templates that we use, which, by the way, you can download from our website, all the templates that we'll share with you today, as well as articles that describe some of the projects that we went through, especially, I think, Jay's project, which was an AutoML project. So let's go to the next slide and skip then to the next slide. So this slide should say lots of products to choose from, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So as you all know, this field is ripe with innovation, almost to an extreme or a fault. There's too many products to choose from out there, and most companies are always in some state of product evaluation and selection. In our space, more specifically, there always used to be, if you go to the next slide, Jay.
Okay.
And then click again, and you'll see 3 circles appear, right?
Yep.
So, in the good old days, there were 3 primary products that every organization had to select in our space, database, or for a data warehouse, BI tool, and an ETL tool. Today, I think the kind of the core set of products is expanded to include a data catalog and glossary, data quality and observability tool, and an AI ML tool. So that's a lot of tooling, even at a very base level for organizations to have to go through and select. And of course, at the pace of change, technological change, these products mature and age out every 5 to 7 years, and you're going to have to replace them. And then we're going to start to address some of these common questions. So go to the first question, Jay.
Yep. We're on question 1. Yep.
Question 1, why should you conduct a formal evaluation? So now I'm going to turn to my senior consultants, Jay and Sean, to answer that question. There is text I'll show at the end to see if they got the question, the answer
well,
right.
Actually, it's showing.
Is it showing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Didn't build.
It's becoming a comedy of errors. So just to add into what's showing on the screen there, we really need to make sure that we are providing the right experience for the intended users. So if we identify the personas and the use cases and the intended outcomes, we want to make sure that the platform we pick is providing the right user experience and getting the user to those outcomes as efficiently as possible in alignment to the needs of their persona. There's so many platforms out there. They all essentially do the same thing. They just do it in a slightly different way. So we want to make sure we're picking the right one that's going to provide the most value in our organization, and make sure we have a high level of buy-in, not just from stakeholders, but from users and other people that are really going to be the key to adoption, and the adoption translates to the value and the ROI. And the last point is a very important one. You want to show that you've been rigorous, you've taken a structured approach to evaluating it, because these platforms aren't cheap, right? So, and there is some risk involved. So you want to make sure that you can basically show that you were rigorous in the evaluation and the decision making around it, just in case things go wrong later.
Yeah, well, that last statement is important. What in case things go wrong, right? I think that's probably the biggest reason and driver here is if things go wrong, they're going to look for someone to blame. And if you didn't do the process properly or meticulously, someone's going to pay.
Exactly.
Okay, Jay, anything to say, or should we move on?
No, I think we should move on. I think that covered it pretty well.
Okay, so let's see if the answers come up in the next one.
Yep, they do.
They do. Okay, well, that's fine. So when can you avoid a formal evaluation process? You don't always need to do a formal process like we do when we help clients. So, Jay, when do you think we shouldn't do something formal?
Well, I think there are a couple of points on this slide that are, for me, are kind of the most salient. One is if the risks are fairly low, if the scope of the product where it's going to be implemented is fairly small, or it's not a critical process, then it's fair to skip a formal evaluation, especially if you're kind of trying something out. So that speaks to alpha or beta testing a product, right? So if you're doing that, then you're not really talking about an enterprise implementation at that point. If your company only buys products from a single vendor, for example, if you're a Microsoft shop and you know that the company isn't really going to entertain a product that Microsoft has, evaluating one from another vendor, then there's still value in evaluating a product, but not competitively with other products necessarily, maybe just against your list of requirements. And then the other thing is that, and this is kind of comes up in our experience, you trust a provider to select products for you. In other words, you hire a consultancy or an external party to both figure out what your requirements are and then find the products in the market that meet those requirements, and you get sort of an objective third-party point of view. So I think these are cases where a formal evaluation process that we're going to go into more detail later isn't necessary.
Yeah, on letter C there, we had a client hire us one time. They were definitely a Microsoft shop, but they just wanted to go through the paces a little bit to ensure that there weren't any major warts in the Microsoft platform that they were looking at. And otherwise, it was a slam dunk for Microsoft.
Yeah, I think in that case, it's just a matter of assessing your readiness and is that tool a good fit? So if you implement it, is it going to solve the problems you're trying to address? Or is it just a waste of time to implement it at all? The other consideration here, and we see this occasionally, where the parent company already has a tool in place and you are just expected to adopt that tool.
Yeah.
That never goes down well. Right?
No.
With our clients, I think there's always been a little bit of open mutiny when that's the case. A lot of times, though, they end up buckling. All right. So, Jay, let's move to the next slide.
Okay, here's number 3.
Who should you include in an evaluation process?
Ultimately, it's a collaborative effort, so it's important to have some user representation in there. We need to understand, do they think it's going to be a positive user experience? Can they achieve their objectives through this tool efficiently? If you don't include them, there could be some pushback later. So it's important to have some representation from those user communities. Of course, your security teams need to be involved to see how you are going to manage security around this. Does it align to your internal standards and policies? And then, of course, your enterprise or data architects to really look at how does it jive with the rest of your ecosystem. Is it compatible with everything else that you have in place? You also need to have your operations teams in there to look at supporting this once it's in place. What is the total cost of ownership from this? Or when you implement this, is it going to be easy for them to support, or is it going to create some additional overhead that really undermines the value that it's going to bring in?
That's a good point. I'll have to add that to the bullet list here. Jay, you recently had an experience with a enterprise architect coming late to.
Yeah. I think the point from that we can take from that experience is that, especially in a large organization where you don't necessarily have visibility into everything that's going on, there may be something parallel or related to the product evaluation you're proposing that's already happening. So, bringing in somebody like an enterprise architect or a data architect who may have a better, view across the organization, especially if you're the group that's driving an evaluation is like a specific business unit, for example. Having an architect or somebody at a level that allows them to see across the organization will prevent you from doing duplicative work or work that's in direct conflict with something else that's going on. So
now, enterprise architects don't have much of an opinion, right, Jay?
No, it's yeah. You have to. They bring a different point of view to the table, also, which oftentimes when a business unit is looking to evaluate a product, they've got a very specific set of problems that they're looking to solve. But where the product fits into an overall, IT stack isn't necessarily on that list. And while it may work well for them, it may not fit with the overall, IT architecture. So having somebody at the table from the get-go advising, it kind of depends on how your architects work within the organization. In most cases, in my experience, an architect brings advice more than consent, right? They're not people who necessarily will prevent the implementation of a product as much as advise and give input into the evaluation that says, make sure you're considering these factors when that might not have been on the evaluation team's radar. So
there's a question in the chat from Hendrik. Hendrik's asking, should procurement be included as a stakeholder in the evaluation? My thoughts on that would be they're included in the process, but not necessarily in the actual evaluation exercises, unless it's something that is going to benefit procurement as a user group. The relationship to procurement is they are guiding the process in terms of helping us understand what does the procurement team need from the evaluation process. What are the outputs that they need to include when they're pushing through the all of the paperwork they need to put in place. So they are guiding it and they pick it up. So once the evaluation's done and we've picked the tool, then they would pick it up and run with it and make it happen.
I think later on in this deck, we talk about making sure you contact procurement and legal up front, notify them what you're doing, and see if they have any requirements that you need to adhere to.
Yeah, there's another comment also that's worth adding here from Emerson that says, in my environment, I also include risk and compliance and audit teams. And I think, again, who you include depends on your organization, but that's a good call out. If that's an important factor for you,
Yeah.
like in many financial organizations, that would be an important group to include.
Or the platform, the nature of the platform and the data
Yeah.
that it'll be using and how it's going to be used will determine some of that as well.
Yeah.
Great. All right. A lot of good stuff to add to this slide. Good. All right. So Jay, let's go to the next slide.
Okay. Here's number 4.
How long is the process? I assume all the tech's built, right? If
Yep.
not, just go ahead and build it.
Yeah, it's there.
What do you think, John, or both of you guys? You both have done this.
Yeah. So it takes as long as it takes, right? It depends how quickly how quickly you can line up your vendors, how long it takes you to work with the stakeholders and users to document the requirements in enough detail that you can evaluate a thing. So at a minimum, it's probably 1 month. On average, it's probably closer to 3 months to go through the process.
Yeah.
But it also depends if you're doing a POC, as it says on the slide there. But even without a POC, it can take a while sometimes. Just getting the information you need from the vendors can be a bit of a challenge, and lining them up to do an efficient evaluation.
Yeah.
Yeah, the danger here is you get into it and you start seeing all these products that you never knew about. And then each time you learn about a product, you learn about new criteria.
Yep.
And before you know it, the whole thing is exploding. Now you're evaluating half a dozen or more products, hundreds of criteria, and you'll never finish, right? So you really do need to time box this thing.
Yes.
You do. And one of the risks is that the platforms are changing so fast. I've had cases where we've done an evaluation, or we had a demo from the one vendor, and then before we finished the evaluation, they had a new release. Or there were some delays, and there was a 6-month delay in making a final decision. And in that time, the one vendor had come up with a new release that had resolved some of the deficiencies we had seen in that platform.
Yeah, related to that is kind of the converse, where the vendor demos features that are not released yet, right? So this is
right,
where
right.
This is on the way. So that's fine as long as you know that that's the case. And if those are must-have features, then you really got to be more concerned about their release schedule and how reliable they are in terms of getting stuff out the door, as opposed to promoting vaporware.
So I would say if you're going to do a formal process, you should shoot to have it done in 3 months. Otherwise, things are going to get strung along and you'll incur the downsides that Sean and Jim were talking about.
Well,
so that means really you should strive to evaluate 3 products and then if you're going to do a POC, do it on 1 product. But go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, and any longer than that, and you risk changing priorities or changing leadership that can squash the initiative. So you want to be pretty efficient and get it done within 3 months.
Okay, yeah. So important to time box. All right, Jay, let's go to the next slide.
Sure. Okay, here's number 5.
Number 5. What pitfalls can you expect along the way? Some of these we've touched on.
Well, I think Peter's kind of in the chat. Peter's mentioning one. So where the initiative gets hijacked by senior management, and that kind of relates to our point D there, where the CEO has a relationship with a specific vendor, and they're steering you down that road, even though that product might not be the best tool. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and both you guys, or at least Jay, I think you experienced right? That the vendors never tell you what the product is priced at, and if they do, they confuse the hell out of you. So you never know how much it's going to cost, and if you don't have a budget, you can't rule vendor. It's hard to rule vendors out based on price.
Yeah. I mean, throughout the course of my career, it's getting pricing information from vendors is really difficult. And now it comes in two flavors. There's how much does it cost? And the answer is that depends. And we need to, what are your requirements? And then you go back and forth and try to hone in on it. And it's kind of evasive through the whole process. And then there's the software as a service model where you pay as you go. And the answer is, okay, well, here's the calculator. Go plug in, a raft of details if you know what they are at this point, like data volumes and compute, needs and so forth. Which at the beginning of evaluating a product that you don't have is very hard to come up with those estimates, right? So pricing always is difficult, but I think the way to deal with that is to keep it front of on top of the conversation as you go, as you're expanding your understanding of what you need to do and what the product does. You just kind of keep revisiting that topic.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen cases where through the evaluation, the products came out pretty close in terms of scoring, but the customer did not go with the lowest priced one based on the experience they had with the sales team at that one vendor. Right, they just had more confidence in that vendor's capabilities because of the way the information was presented, how organized they were,
right,
things like that. But the platforms themselves were ultimately very similar.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sean, because you get an opportunity to get a sense of what it's like to work with this vendor through that evaluation process. That's another benefit of it. And if you're dissatisfied with their responsiveness or their organization before they've got your money, it's not going to get better after, right?
No, exactly. It's a good indicator of the health of that organization sometimes.
Yeah, I think we show that later on. Now, we talked about Johnny come latelys. We had the experience of an enterprise architect coming onto the evaluation team late and kind of changing the whole discourse and adding another product to the list and extending the project timeline. So, Jay, that was yours. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing in the end.
It didn't end up affecting us too much, the extension, because the other thing to understand about the timeline is that it's mostly waiting, right? Waiting to get vendor responses, waiting to get meetings scheduled, waiting to find a day when your entire evaluation team can be available for a demo. It's not like you've got 8 people on an evaluation team working full time on this thing for 3 months. There's a lot of coordination and much more elapsed time than effort.
Yeah, so we talk a little bit about scheduling later on, so we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide. Last question before we get to the methodology. Should you hire?
There's a comment.
Go ahead.
There's a pretty good comment here about a pitfall, though, from Heinrich. He says, a pitfall I encountered was unclear ownership. The CDO and CIO could not agree on the solution, the priority, or even the strategy. And then everything stalled and the DM team was left hanging. And, how do you navigate that?
Interesting. I like that. We haven't encountered that one yet, but you can see it.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes to the, that's the initial step, the kind of the first couple of slides we talked about, getting your stakeholders involved and understanding requirements, and part of understanding requirements is prioritizing them.
And clarifying the decision-making authority, right? So who is ultimately the decision maker, and anticipate conflicts like that and plan for that. So if you have to take it to the CEO to make the final decision or something.
So does this mean that every evaluation project should have a sponsor? Is that what we're talking about when Heinrich says an owner? Is that the same thing as saying it's project sponsor?
That's an interesting one, because there should be a sponsor, somebody who's blessing the effort you're putting into this in the beginning, and who has blessed the initial budget that you're planning to allocate to this. But that could be different than who's making the final decision around what the preferred platform is.
Okay. Interesting.
I would also
Decision.
say that sometimes you don't have that luxury of having a sponsor. Sometimes the evaluation will provide the impetus for an executive sponsor to sign on, but so I would say, if you have to do it as a skunk works and you can, then do it that way, and you'll, but keep in mind that you have to earn the sponsorship as you go, and try to get that involved as soon as possible.
And that's where the benefit of an IT governance organization comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So facilitating those conversations around
Yes.
that type of thing, dealing with conflicts when they come up. If you don't have IT governance, maybe data governance can facilitate that. If you don't have either, then at the front of the project, you need to define who is the ultimate decision maker.
Yeah.
Heinrich,
So I put
good
up
call.
slide 6, which I think in a way addresses some of the pitfalls that we're talking about. So go ahead on slide 6.
Yeah. So should you hire outsiders to facilitate the process? Yeah. I think that the big point here is that, yes, if you need to manage risk, right? If the decision is political or emotional, it's a big project with a lot of scheduling issues. So you need a project manager who's
Mhm.
good. And, if this technology is not intimately familiar with your team, or your team isn't familiar with it, then you probably need someone who knows the technology to steer you around some of the, the landmines. Or if you're really under pressure to make a quick decision.
And I guess another point there is if there's existing bias already and you want to remove that and have kind of a neutral party in there.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. We got about 30 minutes left. Let's jump to the methodology now.
Okay.
So let's go
Right.
to
Product
the
evaluation
product
methodology.
evaluation. So this is kind of at a very high level, the Eckerson Group product evaluation methodology. Though, to be honest, it's pretty darn generic, right? First, you want to define the scope, and a lot of this we've addressed right now. Who is the owner, right? How many products do you want to evaluate? How much time do you have, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into it, and then gather requirements from your target users that you've defined the scope, conduct demos with the vendors. These tend to be what we call scripted demos, and we'll get into that a little bit. And then, if necessary, conduct a proof of concept. We'll talk about whether you need to do that or not. And then, after you've made the selection, you do have to purchase it. Sometimes you can run into problems there. That's kind of outside the scope of our purview. And then you want to implement it so that it actually gets adopted, right? So this evaluation methodology is all about ensuring you get buy-in so that when you finally implement it, stands a good chance of getting adopted. So we'll have some thoughts on implementation. So now we're going to go to the next slide, Jay, and why don't we just
there's a timeline of kind of about how much time you want to spend on each of these steps.
Oh, there is? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think I deleted those. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go to the next slide. People can look
Okay.
at that.
Methodology tips.
Why don't you display, since we've been displaying the text anyway, why don't you display those? Because I don't think they're displayed, right?
No, they're not.
Okay. So I explained the methodology. I outlined it at a very high level. What other thoughts do you guys have about adopting this methodology or something else?
Yeah, I would say that tailoring the methodology to your culture is really important. Is your organization, very federated, right? Where there's a lot of autonomy within different departments or regions, or however your company is divided up. You need to take that into consideration versus a company that's very much a top-down command and control type of organization, highly regulated, that kind of thing. So you have to know what the people that you're working with expect in terms of how processes unfold. And amend the methodology appropriately.
Well, and that comes in if your organization has existing standards or methods for procurement, for evaluation procurement, then definitely incorporating those into the methodology and using our methodology to fill some gaps or just augment your current methods.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about duration, that you should time box it, because the duration will expand almost exponentially as you add products to be demoed, products to be tested in a POC, and depending on how easy or hard it is to schedule meetings with everyone.
And it depends on the complexity of the requirements that you're evaluating as well. So some platforms are pretty straightforward, whereas other ones cover a broad spectrum of capabilities. So then you need to allocate enough time to really understand how those fit with your environment.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the next slide, Jay.
Okay. Define the scope.
Define the scope. Okay. This, I think, this actually was the last part of the methodology we filled in. Is probably the most important. So first and foremost, what is the problem you're trying to address by buying this new technology? If you don't know where you're going, you probably will never get there, right? So it almost would help to write it down and create a little one-page product plan, right? Starting out with what's the objective. And then identify the type of technology, which seems pretty obvious. We want a data catalog. Well, it's not always obvious, right? And it might be helpful, again, to write it down just so everybody's clear. And not everybody may know what this technology is, so you might want to define it. We should probably create another template that is a scope template. Be a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically a little business plan for the project, right? So then who are the target users, stakeholders? Define who they are, write a little description. Define how long you really have to do this project and this evaluation. Again, time boxing is going to be important, or else it might get away from you. In that vein, you need to define how many products you're going to evaluate, both in the vendor demo phase and the POC phase. At least have something to shoot for. Sometimes you make adjustments based on a variety of things. I mean, Jay, your last engagement, everyone wanted to have 3 vendor demos and 1 POC, but you ended up doing 4 and 2, I think, right?
That's right. Yeah, actually 5 demos and 2 POCs.
5, 2, and the project expanded from 3 months to 5 months, I think, right?
And that was driven by an issue related to number 3 of who are the personas that we're trying to empower with a solution, right? And when we started, we thought that the solution would be for a number of different kinds of personas. And as we went through the requirements and went through the available products in the space, we realized that, an AutoML tool for someone with no statistical background whatsoever, and one that would serve data scientists at the same time, we weren't likely to find something that did that well. So we really had to focus on which of the personas was more important, and then tailor the requirements and the process to that. And that's where we ended up looking at a couple of different products rather than just the one rather than just one that we had planned for. We realized we needed to get hands-on with a couple of different options, different approaches.
Well, and that's a good point with bullet number 2 there, the type of technology. You also need to look at the core capabilities, because there's so many platforms that have a mix of capabilities. So what are the ones you're really looking at implementing?
Yeah, and just going down the list more, define the methodology. It would actually help to define the steps that you're going to go through. Mm-hmm. Identify the project manager. That person's going to be critical to keeping the project on track. Identify who's going to evaluate the product. And if you're going to have a POC team who's going to be on that team, although you could probably postpone that until later in the project, which is why this has an asterisk there. So let's go to the tips and tricks slide, the next slide, Jay, and then
Okay.
you can have the text appear. So
All
these are
right.
some additional scope tips aimed to evaluate products from 3 vendors. We said that. PLC on 1, we said that. All right, so this one we'll talk about. Project manager can be from an outside person or firm. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but maybe you guys have some perspective on that. And then finally, the eval team should consist of influential future users.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think a project manager, the way on the last project we did like this, it was kind of like 2 in a box, right? There was an in-house project manager and myself, and the in-house project manager was responsible for, because he had access to everybody's calendar, internal calendars, for setting up meetings and so forth. And I was really kind of outward facing, dealing with the vendors and informing them about what we were trying to do, and then getting them on board and so forth. So that can work. But you don't necessarily need the outside person, but you definitely need somebody who's got access to everybody's calendars, just as a purely practical thing, to be able to schedule meetings and so forth for demos and project updates.
So just one other point here, like the all of the details we were looking at in the previous slide are really important for setting expectations with stakeholders. And so once you've done that pre-work, making sure that you have sufficient communications around this and get everybody on the same page, remove any confusion around what's happening and what the outcome is going to be.
Great.
There are some good comments in the chat, which I think we should take a moment to kind of surface. Nicholas asks, has anyone done design thinking or cross-functional pilots with products to get a true feel for potential solutions and products? I would say, the way I interpret that question, and Nicholas, you can, give us a little, thumbs up, or if we get it right, about what you meant here, is that, the product that you're going to evaluate doesn't exist in a vacuum by itself, right? It's got to be integrated with the rest of your, with your stack. So, for example, in the project we just did on AutoML, it's got to be able to connect to all the different types of data sources that this organization had, right? So that's something that we evaluated on paper, and then had the vendors demo when they did their demos, and then also when we did the POC, we actually had the product hook up to a number of different data sources. So yeah, you do want to, as best as you can, see how the product would integrate with the rest of your stack that it's going to come in contact with.
Yeah, I was on a project. It was actually more of a data architecture project, but we ended up building 3 use cases kind of as a trial on a temporary stack. And it proved very effective because each use case really, one, it tested a different part of the architecture, different tooling, different models, but it also, each use case was from a different department or area of the business. And very quickly, people could see, feel, touch, what this solution could be for them. And it really helped drive buy-in and consensus around the project. So let's go to the next slide, Jay.
Okay.
Gather requirements. So this is a really important part. First, you want to conduct research on the technology itself and products. You can do that a lot on the web. And compile a superset of criteria and products. Sometimes you are subscribed to a research company. They may have already done this for you, which is helpful. We've done this a lot ourselves, and our topic page has a lot of reports that on different product areas. Then once you compile the superset, then you want to talk to your users, your target users and stakeholders, and identify the high-level capabilities that they need, and start to define or look for those key use cases that could serve as test grounds for this technology. You also, as you're gathering requirements, want to make sure you gather company requirements. That means talking to stakeholders on the architecture side, procurement maybe, who might have a say on pricing. If your CEO has a preferred vendor, the IT team, as Sean said, is going to have to support it and administer it.
And
then
also
finally,
security and compliance requirements would be in there as well.
yeah, right. And then finally, you kind of take the intersection of the two sets of requirements, right? The technology criteria that you gathered at the outset, and then you kind of drill into just the criteria that are needed by your target users and stakeholders. And then you prioritize those by must have and nice to have. And then you have your criteria list.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go to the next slide, Jay, and build out the text. And I think here we're saying it can be very helpful to leverage the product knowledge of someone who lives and breathes this space that you're entering, either buy or find a published report, like stuff that we've done in the past. Hire a person to advise you on that initial requirements phase, or hire someone like that to actually run the entire evaluation, like we've done. Make sure you interview representative sample of users across departments, if they're going to be users across departments using this thing. Make sure you capture some user journeys and use cases, because those can serve as your POC. Any other thoughts, guys?
Yeah, so often before you even can gather the requirements, there's some education that needs to be done in terms of the art of what's possible within these platforms and how that relates back to, their business environment. We find that quite often with data catalogs and data governance type platforms. We need to spend some time raising the group up to the appropriate level of knowledge before we can even get into discussing requirements and what's a must-have versus a nice-to-have. Things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also think that I believe in being fairly rigorous around designating requirements as must-have. Must-have means that if the product doesn't do it, you don't proceed with it, right? And oftentimes I've had the experience of, we have a must-have criteria and then a product doesn't really do it, but there's sort of one or more people at the table who are saying, oh, but we should still evaluate it because look at all this other great stuff it does. Well, then maybe that requirement isn't really must-have, right? If you're willing to entertain a product that doesn't have it, then it's not must-have.
Yeah, that's a good point. We almost need another one, which is must-have versus should-have versus nice to have.
Exactly. And that's actually how I do it usually, is must-have, should-have, nice-to-have,
We all fall prey to temptation. Like we see this nice shiny thing out there and we want it, and we tend to maybe minimize the things it doesn't do, which could come back and bite us if we're not careful.
Yeah.
So we definitely need another reason for a very disciplined, formal process. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Moving on.
Okay.
Conduct vendor demos. Okay, so once you've gone through your requirements, then someone is going to have to apply those requirements to the broad set of products that you've been looking at. This is where a research person like Jay or Sean can really help in their area of expertise. And ideally come up with a short list of 3. It's really what you want, ideally 3.
And sometimes this involves having a smaller meeting with the vendors to validate assumptions around their platform, to confirm, we have a clear understanding of what features, what capabilities they have, and whether it's a good fit for evaluation or not.
All right. So someone who, like the project manager, can basically DQ vendors up front before the evaluation team gets involved. Yeah.
Like one of the key things here with these type of exercises is minimizing the amount of effort involved. So, really focusing on who needs to be involved in different pieces and who doesn't, and breaking it into smaller chunks where you can have smaller audiences for pieces of the demo based on what it is you're looking at.
Right. Okay, so once you have that short list, then you want to create a request for information from vendors. That basically includes the criteria that you're going to evaluate them on, and the process and the schedule, and you send it out to them and schedule a demo meeting, where usually a 2 or 3 hour meeting where they can demo their product according to the requirements that you've set forth, which you can put together in form of a script. That's kind of what bullet 3 is: create an evaluation and scoring form. And Sean just mentioned the importance of explaining the criterion process to vendors and the eval team, so everyone knows what these products are being scored on and evaluated on. Then the most difficult part: schedule and conduct the demos. And then the project manager, will compile and present the results.
And if you prep the vendors well, they can structure their demos in a way that's going to be easier for the evaluators. So if they understand how the evaluators are going to be looking at the product, then they can adjust their demo, and hopefully, each vendor you're doing that with is providing a consistent overview of their platform, so it's easier for the evaluators to compare apples to apples.
Yeah, exactly. Going back to what you said earlier, Sean, about having a sort of a pre-meeting with the vendors can help set expectations for what a demo should do, and your list of requirements that you are going to stack rank in terms of priority. Then we structure the demo the way we did it in this last project was, we told all the vendors that you need to hit these criteria in this order, because we want you to start with what's most important to us and then work your way down the priority list. If we run out of time, we'll run out of time looking at things that are less important than the must-haves, right? So,
yeah.
And as you said, you get it in the same order, then everybody's seeing the same thing in the same order. It helps for the apples to apples comparison later.
And depending on the audience, sometimes you want them to demo the user journey for that use case, not just the capabilities of the tool. We need the users to understand the experience they can expect and how easy it is to get to their to achieve their objective. And that's really what differentiates a lot of these platforms, is that journey, not what it can do, but how it does it.
How it does it, yeah.
So this is what we call a scripted demo. That didn't really make it into the title here, but the more, and I think you guys would agree, the more prescriptive you can be in what the vendor has to demonstrate and in what order, the better that evaluation is going to be. And vendors that don't follow the script, well, that should be part of the evaluation too.
Well, and I was just going to say that I've seen cases where the vendor completely ignored what we spoon-fed them the information. We set expectations, and they appeared as if they didn't even look at any of it. They just came in with their standard deck, their standard demo, and it really resonated badly with evaluators. Right away, they were taken off the list.
Yeah.
Yep. Ditto. Same thing happens on a number of projects I've done. Yep.
Okay, so we're going to show you 2 evaluation forms. Go to the next slide. This is John, you created this form, and this is a template that's available up on our website for you guys to download and customize to your own needs. Sean, do you want
this is one? Yeah, this is one that's specific to a data governance, so a data catalog platform. So we start by looking at the high-level capabilities. So we have core data catalog versus lineage versus privacy, security, quality capabilities. Then we broke that down to the features that we wanted. So we actually had another step between this where we did look at that user journey. So we identified the use cases, identified the steps that the user is taking to walk through that use case, and then identified the features that we wanted related to those use cases and the journeys. and then prioritize those must-have versus nice-to-have. Then there's also categories that are the non-user facing categories. So the operations and the security aspect of the platform itself, architecture pieces, interconnectivity, all of those things as well.
So you probably also had a vendor category and then maybe a pricing and support category.
Exactly. So the health of the vendor organization, do they have like an academy or user resources online, things like that.
And is this something you showed to the vendors before they came in and did the demo?
Yes. Yeah. So we walk through, and some of the demos would reference our IDs when they were presenting. So they would organize their demos based on our categories and reference the IDs. Sometimes they would fill this out and send it back, even though we didn't ask them to, kind of highlighting where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, which was helpful as well.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Why don't we go to the next slide? This is Jay, you use this one, right?
Yeah, this one is specific to evaluating AutoML products, and we created, there's a question in the chat. Does this link back to the requirements? Absolutely. So the evaluation criteria that you're seeing here related specifically to the requirements that came up out of our research, and also are in stack ranked order, right? So you're not seeing the weight in here, but this is how, this shows that what was important to this organization. You could rearrange these in a different order if you wanted to, but this also was reflected in the RFIs that we sent to the vendors, right? So this exact set of features and details in this order was in the RFI. And then when we did the demos, they went through all but one vendor followed this script, and the evaluators were just dropping in their scores as explained at the top of what the scores meant. There is also a tab in this that explains what each of these features are. What do we mean by ease of use and user roles and interface or model explainability? All that is defined. That was also in the RFI so that the vendor would know what the words that we were using to describe our requirements meant to us, right?
So just one note on this. So one of the things we can do if you have a well-structured evaluation form is pull that into a reporting tool like Power BI and then look at it from different dimensions or different angles. And it's important to do some quality assurance on the scoring, because in some cases you'll see for one requirement, you will have different users mark having very different perspectives on that vendor. Some will say it does not have that, it does not meet that requirement, and other ones will be very firm that it does. Then you need to do some quality management and follow up on that to really get a quality evaluation. And that's where having somebody who really knows those platforms and what they can do is helpful, because then you can talk about it and go and get evidence that platform does, and then adjust those scores as needed to make sure it's as accurate as possible.
Yeah, related to that is one thing that we did in scheduling our demos is that we allocated more time than we expected the vendor would use for the demo meeting. And then we allocated 30 minutes at the end for like a debrief just with the evaluation team. So any points of confusion or questions could come out before they sat down and did their scoring.
And in some cases, we split the demo into a business-facing demo and a more technical demo, and do the technical demo first, because if it doesn't pass that level, then we're not taking up the time from all those business users to go through.
That's a great point.
Okay, why don't we go to the next slide and fill out the text there. I think we touched on some of these. Replace an RFI with a vendor call. A great way to clear up any confusion that a document sometimes I guess can be ambiguous when it's interpreted, right? So the vendor call can really clear up confusion on the vendor side, and maybe they decide that they're not able to really compete well and they withdraw, which is a good thing. So you just saved yourself a lot of time. We talked about how a vendor behaves during the demo process should be part of the evaluation.
Hmm.
Do they follow the script? Do they send the right people? Do they keep changing things? Also, scheduling, as I said, is a big issue. So we discovered, I think, Jay, you did, that you should just book multiple 3-hour blocks from the evaluation team, which is 3 to 5 to 8 people.
Yeah.
Book that a month out, right? Where people's schedules aren't crowded, right? Because you'll never get them if you're trying to book it a week out.
That's true. Yeah, and then we kind of sent those options to the vendors, and then we said, look, if you can't make any of these, let us know. But here's our preferences for when we'd like you to pick a demo time.
Right,
So,
and you blocked more meetings, 3-hour meetings than you actually had number of vendors invited,
right.
so that in case there wasn't a hit, increases your chances to get a hit. Yeah, schedule 1 hour with each vendor and the eval team to educate them on the process. We talked about that. And then keep the eval form simple. You just saw examples of 2 forms. And what we didn't show, I'm sorry, I forgot about this, Sean. We didn't have a screenshot of your Power BI tool for showing the results. I don't know if that's something you want to share with the group here. We can put that in the package of templates. All right, let's go to the next slide. Conduct the proof of concept, to identify who the testers are, write the use cases and criteria for evaluating those use cases, coordinate the proof of concept with the vendor. Sometimes that takes a lot of time. Conduct the proof of concept and compile results, convene the eval team to vote yes or no on the product. This was an sample evaluation guide for the POC, so the testers would kind of keep this by their side, and as they were testing the product, they would fill in the rows. And then if you go to the tips and tricks slide, Jay, and fill in the text, avoid paying for a POC if you can possibly help it. Leverage free trials, use the SaaS option. You don't always need a POC. I think, Jay, you did one. Sean, you didn't. You guys can talk about why and why not, right? But, if the evaluation is straightforward, or if you're not going to be able to test it until you really implement it fully, then maybe you shouldn't do it. And a POC takes time. So try to focus on just one product if you can. Any thoughts?
I think with the SaaS systems these days, you can get a 1-year contract on things and, kind of treat that as a PLC anyway. So there's less of an obligation or less of a commitment. You're still forking out money, but I think there's a little bit less risk involved. So you don't always need a POC if there's a clear understanding of the capabilities and how you're going to implement it.
And conversely, if your organization doesn't have any experience at all with a class of product, then it's important for the key users. Your POC team should be made up of people who are going to be hands-on with the product, who actually do the job that the product is supposed to help you do, right? So it's very difficult to go from a demo to a real world experience without something like a POC that lets the individuals get hands on a keyboard. And in the case in the project we just did, we did 2 POCs with 2 products, and both vendors were very interactive during that process and really helped train the team a little bit on their product so that they weren't getting stuck not working through the use case, just trying to, for example, get the product configured and running, right? Which isn't necessarily, an easy process depending on your environment, right? So getting past those hurdles and allowing the users to focus on exercising the functions that are important can be critical.
Great. So, Jay, let's go to the second to last slide. That's the conclusion final slide. And then, so we'll wrap this up. We had a slide or 2 on purchasing and implementation.
conclusion.
Those will be
There
in
we
the
go.
deck. So let's just go to the last slide.
Is that evaluating product tips?
Evaluating product tips. Yeah. So, in general, we've covered a lot of ground here. There's been a lot of great feedback from the team here and from our audience. Thank you very much. But, if to summarize, plan ahead, scope out the project, know why you're doing it. I think we heard get an owner or sponsor, adhere to a methodology, recruit a strong project manager and eval team, minimize the number of vendors participating if at all possible to keep your scope on track. And then, Jay, if you click again, you'll see the resources that are available up on our
Yep.
website. We may add some to that, like I may want to add a scope form. And so with that, guys, any last thoughts or words from you?
I think we've covered so much in
Yes,
this
we
short
really
period.
did. One last point I guess I would make is that our previous webinar was about change management, and this evaluation process is all about change management. It's helping introduce something new to an organization and getting buy-in and understanding the needs and so forth. That really lines up well with our with all the stuff we talked about in that change management webinar, which is still available for you can go to our website and watch the recording of it. So yeah, I'd recommend that.
So I guess my last thought would be, don't forget about the human aspect. If you want to achieve your objectives, or if you want the outcomes, you need to understand how the humans will interact with the tool and get their input. You need to take that human-centric design approach and focus on that less than the tool itself.
Yeah.
Understand?
Amen.
Well said. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your insights. And I'd like to thank our audience for their participation. And I hope everyone has a great day. Take care.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.